much for being here. And thank you so much to the library staff for helping set this up. Thank you to Rick Livingston for all your help getting this show up. Thank you to Morongo Basin Cultural Arts Council, who really helped kind of maintain this relationship for artists to show work here at the library. So thank you all so much. What I want to do is talk about some of the threads that go through my work, some themes, but also some kind of formal things that I have done for my whole art career that all have kind of come together to make the pieces that I have hanging up today, which can be a little bit disparate, but you might begin to see that there's something that ties them all together, if not tightly, so at least loosely ties them together. I've been an artist for quite a long time, since I was a young child. I went to school to study art at the California College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland and graduated there in '98. So went to a real art school and got a real art degree about 20 years ago? 20 years ago. 30?
20.
20? Help me with that.
20.
20?
You were really.
So, really, that was a place where these themes that have been throughout my work for the last few decades have really kind of coalesced. What I want to start with is a piece I made when I was in school in Oakland at CCAC, when I took some time off on a spring break to come down to a little park called Joshua Tree National Monument. It wasn't a park yet.
Yep.
My first visit down here, and after I came back from that, I made a piece which is very simple. This is for an illustration class, and it was simply contrast. The idea was to do contrast. So in this one piece that I did about 21 years ago, you can see the beginnings of some themes that I've carried on for many, many years. First is, of course, animal bones, and very, very concerned with animal bones. I found a kangaroo rat jawbone while I was down there. I'm like, this is the most amazing shape I've ever seen. On the ground while I was hiking. Came back, I painted the blue sky that I saw here in the desert. I painted some texture, it's a little dusty now, but some texture to represent the rocks. I couldn't take any bones out of the national park, so I had to use a bone I found in Oakland. It's a chicken bone.
Oh.
But it's just a bone, right? So, and then also I was really into the idea of adding text to my painting, so this is one of the first times I added text, and it's just the word, which can mean so much when you think about the desert. And I'm happy to, there's not big pieces, I'm happy to pass them around. I don't know if that's going to be too distracting if I pass pieces of art around, or you just want to... Sure. One of the other things that I discovered in art school was abstraction, so I really got into doing abstract pieces, and one of the first pieces I did was a very simple piece, and this comes to another couple of themes that I've really carried over for a long time. First is using tracing paper. So covering my wood panels, this is just wood, covering it with tracing paper and then painting the tracing paper, or having painting underneath that's then partially obscured by the tracing paper. The other thing that I started working with is this modular idea of painting. So for this particular piece, what I did is I took a long roll of tracing paper and rolled it all the way out, about 12 feet. And I wrote a narrative, I wrote a story across the entire piece, just one line. And I took that piece of paper and I cut the paper up. So each piece has a fragment of the story in it. And it's very hard to see, it's just very light in pencil in there. So then I wound up with 11 of these panels, all kind of the same size and having a relationship to one another, but they could be arranged either, they could be shown, in a line, they could be shown in a grid, they could be turned, any direction. So I really started to work with this idea of modular ways of painting, and taking a thing and disassembling it, taking it apart and then being able to reassemble it later on. So this again is 21 years ago, it's 97. There were 11 originals of these. I think I have 6 of them left. 5 have been sold or given away, so they're out in the world somewhere. And who knows if they'll ever be remade? I don't know. It doesn't matter. It started to age as well. This tracing paper did begin to yellow a little bit over the years, and I kind of like that aging. It kind of lets the piece transform over time in a way that's uncontrolled by me. So this is just a series I called 11 by 11, and there you go. You can look at that one too. At the same time, back in school, I started looking at animal skulls. I was doing life drawing, and I was really into the kind of the curves and the forms and the shapes and the shading that happens with natural things, like human bodies. The human bodies weren't enough for me. I was looking at animal skulls, and this is simply a raccoon skull that I drew on a wooden panel. So again, I like to use wood, and I colored in all the areas around the skull with charcoal, and then I fixed the charcoal. And it was pretty cool, but I was like, you know what? I kind of want to obscure this. I don't want to just give my audience the thing right away. I want to make them work for it. So I just took a layer of paraffin wax. So I covered this with paraffin wax.
Oh.
It was really nice, this beautiful kind of, not shadowy, but very almost translucent image. Then I left it in the sun, and half the wax melted. So the wax over the black parts got hot and melted away. So then I'm like, oh, see, they're transforming over time in ways that I can't control. And I made another study of that same raccoon skull from the side. And again, some of the wax melted, and then I came to the desert. And these are 20 years old, and they were pretty stable. And then I got here, and it got really hot. And so now the wax is pulling away from the wood. So now I have something just crazy going on even sometimes. And so I really like the idea of, first of all, obscuring the image, not really letting you know exactly what it is, and letting it be affected by the environment, by time itself. So I'm going to pass this one around. There's a little bit of charcoal, so be careful, but it's pretty. It handles a lot, so it should be too much charcoal. So these are the themes that I started with, which was using a narrative as part of the painting, this idea of modular painting, and also obscuring and revealing, this kind of playing with obscuring and revealing the image. What happened then is that I left school, traveled around the world, came back. I didn't have a studio. I had to work on my kitchen table, so my scale was pretty small. If you have ever worked on your kitchen table, it affects the scale of your work. And one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to come back to this tracing paper kind of modular painting. But I wanted a stronger narrative. I wanted the narrative to be more part of it, not simply an abstract composition. And the story that really resonated for me was the story of Laika. And Laika is the first dog in space. She was launched into orbit in 1957 by the Soviet Union. And her story is very, very compelling. So there's all of this mythology around her. She was a hero at the time, but it came out later that her story was really very tragic. This is a book that Jillian got me as a reference for Soviet space dogs. I love this stuff. So she makes a great story. And in 2009, I came up with this series, which is called Laika. And I did several series for Laika using a similar format. I came back to using tracing paper. I actually put Laika in there as a character, and just used some ideas of kind of scattering graphite over the tracing paper to look like a star field reversed. So it was kind of this idea that she's kind of floating in space, and using the writing on the panel to kind of represent the trajectories, orbits around the Earth, and the kind of mathematics and some of that kind of technical stuff around space travel. And again, I wrote a story about Laika across a very long piece of tracing paper, and that's kind of this writing here. It's very much more gestural than the previous one. But again, I took that story, chopped it up, and put it over several panels. So this is a series for Laika. This is actually a later series. I did 4 different series. And there are probably 10 of these. And most of them sold, so most of them are out there in the world, like 7 of them. I think I have 3 of them left. So there's Laika. At the same time, on my kitchen table, I became very interested in aerial photography. And this is actually an ad campaign for Bali. I guess that's a fashion, they make bags or something like that. They would just show these beautiful pictures of like the edges of glaciers, and then this beautiful like just endless ocean. And I just was obsessed with this line and this contrast that they were using in this very, super fashion ad campaign. And so I started to imitate it. And again, I used small panels because I was on my kitchen table. This was very simple. This is acrylic paint. And so this is a series a lot that's about like my own anxiety about this kind of growing environmental threat, like this endless loss of glaciers and loss of ice as everything warms in this kind of inexorable move towards Armageddon. And really, it's a very simple, abstract kind of a series where I just painted the edges of glaciers and really experimented with how to use that acrylic paint to get that transition from that kind of icy little shallow edge as it goes into the depths of the ocean. But also really looking at the texture that happens up here on the ice. And just had a lot of fun with it. And again, made maybe 15 of these. And they're pretty much, they all are out in the world too. They've been sold. So this series is called Nord. And it's just about this kind of anxiety that I had about the loss of the pack ice around the North Pole. So what starts coming into my art around this time is my own fears, my own anxieties and fears are really starting to come into my work now. And it's not just this kind of anxiety, fear about global change or warming, but also I started thinking about these depths, the depths of these oceans. And there's something about the depth of the ocean that just scares me. It's very scary to imagine that endless depth. And so that's going to come into my work even more. So what changed for me, kind of doing these smaller panels, doing lots of them, like lots of series of the same kind of thing over and over, is that I found a studio space in Oakland. It's called American Steel Studios, and it's an amazing building. It's a former steel factory in West Oakland, so very close to my house where we live. And so I got a very big space, a very industrial space, and so I got to go back to something I had experimented with in school but wasn't able to. And that was using roofing tar in my paintings. So this little brown stuff here is actually a kind of roofing tar. When you open it up and use it, it's incredibly noxious, it's very toxic, it's stinky, so I couldn't really do it in my house. So I set it aside. But being in a large industrial space now, I got to get it out again. I was very excited. So I began to add this roofing tar. This is a very specific brand of roofing tar that gives this very rich kind of brown tone to it, this beautiful earthy tone. And of course they quit making it, so I don't know how to find it.
Really?
Yeah, now the stuff they make is this really flat black and it's rubberized. So I think there's something really organic in this to make it this rich brown. It's almost like peat or something. So I began to bring this into my painting. I came back to this theme of Laika, the first dog in space, but this time with a lot more fear, a lot more anxiety was really into it. So I began to add this earthiness to it because what I became concerned with was the way that this dog was launched into space in this tiny capsule against her will. She never came home. She did not come back. She died in space. I know, her body orbited the Earth, I mean, for months. And then when it re-entered, it just completely burned up in the atmosphere. So I became obsessed with this idea that Laika never was able to return to the Earth. So I included Earth in this kind of a starscape. I started bringing back the animal bones. So there's all these drawings and images of dog skeletons kind of disjointed and just floating in space. So I came back to the bones. And the tracing paper I used before, I began to burn the edges. So I really just lit it on fire because to represent that fiery entry back into the Earth of the capsule that just completely immolated what was left of Laika. So, and I liked that rich brown it gave. So these were a new series of Laika paintings, much more kind of addressing my own fear and anxiety. I find them very much more tense, not happy, not a great story about Leica, but still kind of reclaiming her, imagining that she is able to return back to the Earth. So this is a series, I did a lot of these also, different sizes.
Maybe you should make a trip to the tar pits.
Oh, I've been to the tar pits.
Well, scoop some out.
Scoop some out. Oh my God, scooping out. That's a good idea. Another thing I was able to do in this bigger studio, is this, are you guys able to follow? Am I talking too fast?
No.
Okay. I just kind of like barrel through. All right, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll try to not talk too fast. The other thing was a change in scale. So my new space in American Studio was about 500 square feet, shared with another artist. So my paintings got bigger. And I said, well, what if I just took all of this stuff, tracing paper, these beautiful kind of deep blues and greens, and roofing tar, put it all together. So I'm like, how can I do that? So I began to make these panels, and these are also modular. So I took the first composition I did was panels this size, there's 7 of them, and I just put them in a row, and I painted one complete composition. And once I was done, I was able to take those panels and separate them again, so I could take it apart and reassemble it. So this is them in progress. So you can see that these are just the panels all lined up against the wall. And then I painted them all together. So they made a little kind of a wavy, abstract composition. The roofing tar is here all across the bottom. Hidden under the roofing tar in some places are drawings of dog skeletons. So there's dog skeletons buried. And I was imagining I'm giving Leica her burial, which she never got. Burying her properly with her. I became obsessed with the idea of the depths of the ocean for 2 reasons. One is that it's speculated that the remains of the capsule might have splashed down in the Caribbean Sea, or maybe in the Sea of Yucatan, the Bay of Yucatan. But also at this time, there was an airliner that went down over the ocean that they never found. They're still looking for it, the Malaysia Airlines flight. And so this resonated for me because I have an extreme fear of flying. I hate to fly in an airplane. I'm afraid of falling. And I'm afraid of falling in the ocean especially. I'm afraid of being in the ocean and just kind of sinking for tens of thousands of feet. Like that, it just terrifies me. I'm terrified of being completely lost. Like my body is just gone. So that ties into Leica's experience. It ties into the experience of these passengers on this airplane, which are simply gone. So this kind of ocean depths for me is it's all about my fear. So this first series is I found this term for the fear of flying, which is called, are you ready? Pteromerhanophobia. Which is a fear of flying, fear of closed spaces.
What was it again?
Pteromerhanophobia. So I painted these 7 panels in a row, and I looked at them and I'm like, I don't know. I had a show coming up, and my studio mate was in the room, and I was like, I don't think this is working. And he said, why don't you turn them, flip them, but flip every other one. And I was like, so I tried it, because I could, right? They're on wood, I just took them apart, and I flipped every other one, and this composition was born. So this is what that piece looked like. I was like, that's so cool. And it adds another element, which is that part of the fear of flying is the fear of falling, and the idea of tumbling through space like endlessly, and that tumbling of space for Leica endlessly was really caught in a very dynamic way with this composition. So I was super happy with that. I put it up on the wall for the show, and it sold. It's like that night it sold. This piece sold. So
The whole thing?
the whole thing. So the first iteration of this series called Pteromerhanophobia. I was very, very pleased with it, and it's in someone's house in Oakland right now. And I hope that they're not afraid of flying.
Did you give your studio mate a commission?
Shit, I gave him lots of
Yeah.
I built all of the furniture for us in the studio, so he got to use some of my stuff. I paid him back, yes. I made a postcard from that to promote my art practice, so I was so pleased with it. And I'm glad because since these pieces are no longer, with me now, I do have them kind of immortalized. I do have a lot of extra cards, so if you're interested, please feel free to take a card. The contact information in the back is a little bit out of date, but if you want a little card with that composition,
Cool.
or if you want to know how to spell pteromephanophobia, it's on that. It's a very long word, pteromephanophobia.
Perfect.
Have you ever made another painting in panels like this?
I did. I made a lot more. I did a lot more series of those. So I did at least 3 more in this deep kind of green-blue color, and then I did a piece in a kind of a red-orange kind of palette. And the thing about these panels is that I made, even though there's 3 separate compositions, it's all the same size panel. So I sometimes take them and mix and match. Like I take some from one and from the other and flip them and see what works best. So I really do play around with that idea of the modularness of it. And I think my inspiration for that is that I love Legos. I'm obsessed with Legos. I have many Legos, which you take apart and put together all endlessly. So that's a big theme of mine.
Didn't you get them for your birthday?
Not yet.
No, didn't you have a birthday before that you got Legos?
Oh yeah, I did. I got a little.
remember that. You built something really interesting, but I can't remember what it was.
Well, it depends on which birthday. I've had lots.
It was last birthday.
Dinosaur?
Oh, it was a 2-headed dragon. Yeah, 2-headed
Yeah,
dragon.
the dragon.
Dragon.
That's
Dragon.
what it was.
Dragon,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that on Facebook.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Groovy. Yes. So Legos does count a lot in my work. So what I did after this is I took the idea and I made a few compositions which were then horizontal. So you'll see a piece over, it's kind of over by the computers there, which is a similar idea, but the panels are horizontal now, and it's just a diptych, but kind of did a few in that orientation. So one of the things I wanted to do when I hung the show here at the library is that the space available is very horizontal.
Right.
And I had panels like this, and I'm like, oh man, what am I doing? So I'm like, well, it's abstract. What if I just, so I do have one up here, which is simply sideways, and I'm like, it completely changes the context. And I'm really pleased with how they look, even horizontal, even though they weren't created that way. I'm digging how versatile they are as modular pieces.
Are these going to be up for a while, or is this?
Yeah, they're up till, is it October?
It's like, what, 2.5 months?
Oh,
or
cool.
something like that, so.
Wow. So super pleased to be able to produce pieces that were horizontal to fit this space. But before we get there, my painting in open really did kind of pursue these panels, thinking about my own fears and anxieties. And when I got to the desert, we moved to Joshua Tree about 2 years ago from Oakland, so a very urban kind of space, to a very desert and very open space. I had a whole new set of fears and anxieties, and I'm like, oh, so much stuff to paint now. So one of the main themes was I turned back to animal skulls. And that was because when I do a lot of hiking in the wilderness, and I typically go by myself, and I began to find quite a lot of skulls or just bones around. And so just having a lot of fun identifying them because there's so many new creatures here in the area, and I'm like, I'm not sure what that is. And it really took me back to that time, way back in '97 when I was here on a break from school and found this kangaroo rat jawbone that I'd never seen before, and the shapes were just amazing. So really getting into these incredible shapes that animal skulls can make. A lot of hiking I have done in the national park where I'm not able to remove the bones, so I simply photograph them where they are bring the photographs back, and then I paint from that. But it's really been fun just to kind of find different animals, be able to compare them. I had a show up at 29 Palms Inn just a couple of months ago, and it was all just animal skulls. So you can see all the different skulls kind of all lined up, and it was really beautiful to see the different types. And of course, everyone's trying to guess what kind of animal is that. And so also using recycled plywood. So I have lots of plywood left over in my studio, so just using these planks of wood. So just giving a texture I don't necessarily control, but and it has this kind of natural quality to it. And I like that contrast with this very controlled, very almost realistic acrylic painting of this physical object. I love the idea of like the remains of these creatures that kind of share the desert with me. That they're able to, their presence, it lingers even after they're dead. And also, what I became obsessed with is the idea of being lost in the desert. So I was doing this hiking pretty much alone. I was using a lot of maps and a lot of, topographical maps that you get at that store by the visitor center. You get those U.S. Geological Survey maps to make sure I knew where I was and navigate those places. And so looking at those, I was like, these are just beautiful objects in themselves. So I began to take maps and simply tear them up and use them as collage material for my pieces. So these three up above the desk here include a lot of maps. So I was using maps as a collage material and coming back to that roofing tar, using roofing tar again. And this time just kind of mixing sand, just from the ground around here. Just mixing that sand with the roofing tar to give it that gritty, sandy texture that is so much a part of the landscape here, so much a part of my experience as I'm hiking. But these two, one of them is called topophobia, which is not really a word, I just made it up, but it is about my fear about being here in the desert under such harsh conditions and all of the people who go missing hiking around here. It's like, that causes me a lot of anxiety. I mean, I really do feel it. And when I came here, when I first moved here, I heard the story about a young Marine on the base in 1989, which was about the time I graduated from school, and he went missing on the base. And they didn't find his body for, I think it was 8 months. There was nothing. He was just gone. And when they did find his body, the head was not there. They found the head 2 miles away. I know, so I'm like, that feeds into Doug's fear perfectly. I'm like, oh my God, this is some rich fear. Because my fear is disappearing, being gone. Where's your body? What happened? And not knowing. So all of that stuff does go into these new paintings. So all these have been done in the last year since I've been here in the desert. I've been doing the skull paintings. I tried a really big one just because I had a big piece of plywood. I wanted to play with scale. So I did this big one sheet. Get it? Big one sheet. So that's, the skull isn't that big.
Oh. But you did actually see it.
I saw it. The one I saw was not in that good of a condition, so I did use the photo for reference. The one that I saw photographed, I was like skiing on it. And just really quickly, another piece I did is I thought, well, I'm in the desert now. I'm going to be doing these dirty, dusty paintings. I'm not going to be doing the ocean anymore, right? No, not true. So I came back to the ocean and the glaciers once again. And I did this, just a triptych. There were 3 pieces put together. And again, I painted this beautiful kind of ice scape and then this really kind of deep ocean. And this again goes back to this kind of anxiety about the loss of our glaciers and the loss of our ice caps. This is called ablation, and ablation is this great word in geology that means this kind of loss that happens when things melt. And so this triptych was in a show at the San Bernardino County Museum in, oh my God, March? It was in the spring. And it was really nice. It was a beautiful composition. I really was pleased with it. But again, I wanted to display it, but I'm like, the space I have is super horizontal. What do I do? So I took these two panels, and if you can see above the shelter, I just took the two panels and I flipped them.
Oh.
I think it really does look kind of cool, even so that's about where I am with my work today, is continuing with this idea of going through my fears, my new desert fears, but also really kind of thinking about the landscape around me, both in terms of the topography, the way it's mapped as this kind of collage element, and also the remains that I find on my hikes, these animal bones. Really having a great time painting those